Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today, we're going to talk about investment properties, and it's an extremely kind of broad thing to say investment properties. There are so many different classes of investments out there, and people have different expectations of kind of what they're looking for, what they want, and things like that. Again, an investment property can be almost any class of real estate that exists. Again, it can be a single family, right? You can buy a single family and rent it out. You can buy a multifamily and rent out most of it or all of it, right? You can buy a mixed use building. Again, mixed use basically means there's some sort of commercial aspect, be it a storefront or an office, and residential on top. Commercial means just commercial, right? Just offices, a storefront with offices on top. Again, you can buy land or development site, right? And what you do with that, or you could buy land and build a farm on it. You could buy land and subdivide it and build houses on it, right? Those are all investments. A condo can be an investment, right? If you're buying it and you're renting it out. And there are co-ops out there that have immediate and indefinite subletting, right? And that could be an investment property, right? Again, anything can be an investment property if you're doing something with it to make money. Now, yet again, when we're talking about this, and when we're talking about investments, and you get someone who says, "Oh, I'm an investor," right? That's a great thing. Anyone can call themselves an investor if you have any capital whatsoever, right? So you could have a dollar and be an investor because you're going to do something with that dollar, right? And the hardest thing for people to understand in this, and again, we all get excited when we say, "Oh, I have an investor that I'm working with," right? Because everyone has such a different sense of what they're looking for and what they're looking to do with their money, right? What is a good investment for one person might be an awful investment for someone else, right? And what you need to do is get a sense from someone who says, "Oh, I'm looking to invest in New York," be it New York City, New York State, different states if you're licensed there as well, is what are they looking for in the immediate term and what are they looking for in the long term, right? This upfront conversation is going to save you time and money and help kind of guide the conversation that you're having with them and where that's going to go, right? And in this, there are kind of a number of different types of investors. And I find that, there are ones that are easier to work with here than others, right? So a short-term investor, right? What a lot of people refer to as flippers. They want to purchase something, they then want to sell it again, right? And again, maybe in the middle they do something to it, but they could just buy it and sell it the next day, the next week, the next month, right? A flipper, right? And again, we'll go over this, but that doesn't work that well in New York City for a number of reasons. We have medium term, right? What we would call a value add investor, right? They might buy a house that's a little run down. They want to do some work to it, put in some other capital, and maybe get the rent rolls up, ready? Maybe every unit being rented for $600 right now, and if you do $1,000 worth of work to each one, you could rent them for $1,000 each, right? That's what we call value add, right? You're adding value to the property based on the work that you're doing. And those can be, again, those can be long-term investors, but those could also be short-term investors. But again, those tend to be medium-term investors, right? That or what I would consider medium-term. And then there are long-term investors, right? Someone who says, "I want to buy this and I want to keep it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years," right? And there are different things that they can look for in that, right? Some people look for appreciation, right? They want to say, "Okay, I'm going to buy this house with the understanding that in 10 years, this is going to be worth more," right? Or they could say, "Hey, I want to buy this because I know I'm going to get a steady income month to month of X." Maybe they get both, right? Maybe you get appreciation and income, and that's kind of two things that people want, right? And again, in order to get to the gist of what these investors are looking for, you want to get a sense of how long are you looking to hold the property, right? That's an important question. And I think even more importantly, what is your expected rate of return, right? Because you're going to run into people who have what I consider unrealistic expectations for the New York City market, right? Again, for many investors, the numbers in New York City do not make sense because they want a higher rate of return than what you can find in New York, right? And again, for investors, and this has been my experience, that are investing $1 million in prime Manhattan and Brooklyn, right? I have $1 million cash, I want to invest it, right? When we do the math, and we're going to go over this math and how we do it, the average that you're going to find for most condo units and some buildings is a return of between 3 and 4%, right? And a lot of people are be like, oh my God, I can get better returns in the bank. I can get better returns in other places. And that is true, right? So again, why is the number low in New York City, in Manhattan and Brooklyn? Because they are incredibly stable markets, right? That $1 million investment is, again, if you're doing it correctly and the building doesn't, there's not issues with the building and stuff like that, is going to maintain itself and potentially go up while you're getting a return, right? And so it's a very stable market, right? Risk is reward, right? And so that is why if you're investing in other areas that might seem a little riskier, you are probably going to get better returns. And we're gonna talk about that. So first off, right, there's a reason that flipping doesn't work that well in New York State and specifically in New York City, right? Because closing costs for us are relatively high, right? When you're buying an apartment, again, when I do calculations and things like that, you're paying for an attorney, title insurance, mortgage recording fee if you're getting financing, condo or co-op fees if there are those, again, other closing costs. When I do my calculations, and I'll kind of show you the calculator that I use, I always calculate a 4% closing when I'm purchasing a home, right? It's going to be about 4% in addition to what I'm paying for the closing costs. When you go to sell that, it goes up even higher, right? It's between 8 and 10%, right? So if you look at those two, 4% when I bought it, let's just say 8% when I'm selling it, that's 12%, right? So flipping is going to cost you about 12% a year, right? So that means your return has to be way over 12 to make it worth your time, money, effort, and things like that, right? So these closing costs make it so it's not as beneficial to flippers, right? Again, it could be, right? You might say, hey, I can buy this for $100,000 and flip it for $1 million in a week. Sure, flipping's going to be worth it probably, right? But this is why generally the numbers might not work out for someone who's looking to flip. In all of this, we're kind of talking about what investors will call a cap rate, right? What that stands for is a capitalization rate. And what that looks at is how much income you are generating versus how much money is being invested, right? We can do these equations for a number of different things, right? It can be an individual unit, right? Buying a condo or co-op unit. We can do it for a full building, right? It's a little more complicated, or really any investment, right? This works not just for real estate investments, but this works for kind of all investments. And again, what it looks at is the net operating income divided by the purchase price, right? And net operating income is income, right? How much money I'm bringing in on a monthly, yearly basis, what my expenses are on a monthly, yearly basis, and dividing that by the purchase price, right? So this is when someone says, I want a cap rate of X, this is what they're talking about. Again, my mom was very nice and made a pie for anyone who's here. Have some pie. She's going to be our example today. Lori's our investor, right? Lori's my mom. So let's just do an equation of this, right? Lori wants to buy an investment property in Soho. She found a condo that is asking 1.2 million. It would rent for $6,200 a month, and the common charges are $675 per month, and the taxes are $950 per month. What would the cap rate be on this property, right? Again, we can go through this, right? Yearly income minus expenses. Again, I did it on a monthly basis, then did it, right? If we're renting it for $6,200 a month, our common charges and taxes are $1,650 between the two, right? 4,500 times 12 divided by 1.2 million, right? So 54.6 divided by 1.2 million. Cap rate 0.0455%. We want it as a percentage, 4.55%, right? So again, doing very basic math, right? We're just talking about how much she's making, given she's putting down 1.2 million, right? And again, we're leaving out some numbers in this, which I'll go over in a second, but this is kind of what she's doing. And again, this calculation is assuming she's paying cash, right? 1.2 million cash buying this property. She's making 4.55% per year, right? There are additional benefits that an investor gets, which again, we're not going to go into full detail of this today because it gets extremely complicated, and there are things that you should think about. In the same way that, again, you purchasing a home or anyone purchasing a home, there are tax benefits, there are write-off benefits, there's, building equity, there's all these things. Same thing can happen with people, but this is a very basic, right? I'm investing 1.2 million, my costs are this, my income's this, boom, this is my cap rate.
And that could go up after the first year, if you're able to raise the rent. If you're able to lower your expenses, that number could change.
That number can definitely change, right? Rents can go up. Expenses can go up too. So there's always going to be some kind of give and take on these things. So again, what do investors look for, right? Well, again, 8 versus 13, most people probably say I want 13%, right? So again, a high rate of return is possible. Again, in Manhattan and prime Brooklyn, 3 to 4%, in my opinion, for $1 million or under is standard, right? That's what, if you go through this and just start plugging in numbers, you might find stuff that's lower, right? Again, Dewey can talk about 20 West, right? If you look at that from an investment standpoint, it's probably
all of FIDI is between 2 and 3%.
2 and 3% FIDI.
All of downtown is between 2 and 3%. If you get above 3%, that's what I tell investors. You're doing quite well.
Exactly. And again, I have an investor that I worked with. He sold a company. He bought 4 apartments. And if I found him 5 or higher, which I was able to do because of, people had like way low rents, and I'm like, we can get this up, then he would buy it, right? And I sold him 4 units because I was able to get him between 5 and 6% on all of those, and he was very happy. And now he's selling them and making a lot of money on depreciation, right? So that's how he was looking for at least 5% in a stable market, right? And again, 2 to 3, 4 more standard. And again, we can go through this and just look at examples. And I'm happy to show you, if I have an investor I'm working with, how do I go and find properties that I think are good investments? Again, return is always correlated to risk, income, and appreciation, right? Those are the 3 things, right? The higher the risk, the better reward that you want, right? The higher the income, probably the higher the price. And the more room for appreciation could be a little risky, right? Again, these are all things that there's no magic bullet in all of this, right? It's something that you kind of have to start to get a feel for. And as you look at properties and look at things through a different lens, right? Not just someone looking for their primary home, but someone looking for, what are people who are renting looking for, right? What's going on with rental prices in this neighborhood? It's something that you can be very helpful to investors for and about. And again, to me, this is even more fun than working with a primary owner, right? Because you're like, this is a great deal, right? And you can tell someone that, and they're like, wow, this is a good deal. Let's buy it. Okay, so again, as I mentioned, right, cap rates are one way to look at the equation, right? And again, if we're looking at condo units, if we're looking at, again, because of purchase prices in New York City, right? Again, and because of the lack of, let's say, risk, that lower return is more expected, I would say. If we look in other markets, right, you can find better returns. And I promise you that, right? And even very close to where we are, we can find much, much better returns, right? Because again, here's how we have to think about it. Someone who is purchasing something in Manhattan, right? If we look at the comparable things, it's renting an apartment, right? If you're not going to buy, you're going to rent, right? If you have to live here. And again, given how high rents are, that pushes sale price up as well, right? That there's an equilibrium that can be made in certain neighborhoods, but again, it's this back and forth. So if we look at other places, and we look at what again, I consider a more important return, which is an on-cash return, right? So what this looks at is not just what my return is, right? And again, in these cases, these cap rates are basically assuming that we're investing all cash, right? Because again, if we do this with a mortgage in New York, the number is going to be atrocious, right? So most of the time, to do these investments, to get any reasonable return, you have to pay cash in New York City. But in other places, we can look at putting down less, right, and getting financing and getting a better return, which is what I consider my real return, which is a non-cash return, right? Again, in this case, the on-cash return is the same as the cap rate, right? Because we're paying cash for the whole property. If we're looking at other properties, and again, I'm going to use a real life example now in Port Jervis, where I look for investment properties, right, outside of the city. we can actually get, the return might be low, but the on cash return is high because of how we're able to leverage ourselves, right? So again, Lori's back investing. Lori wants to buy investment property in Port Jervis. Port Jervis is a small town about 2 hours northwest of the city in Orange County, right? She found a building that is asking 339,000. It is 3 units that would rent for $1,400 each. Taxes, insurance, she has to pay for water and sewer, doesn't need to do any repairs. She's putting down 20%, and the closing costs are about 4%. What are her on cash returns? Right. This gets a little more complicated when you do, again, because why? We have multiple units, we have we're only putting down 25%, so we've got to do other things, right? So what we're looking at here is, and again, I'm going to show you how I do this on a calculator, right? What we're looking at here is a more leveraged calculator, right? And again, every investor or most investors have their own little calculator they use, right? This is a very basic one that I put together, right? And this works for me. When I'm looking at a property that I might want to invest in, this is what I use. And again, other people might be like, well, you're not including vacancy, you're not including X, Y, Z, right? There's so many things that go into here. I'm very basic. I just want simple numbers. This makes sense to me. This works, right? So again, purchase price, right? In this case, we're saying it's 349, right? What is the down payment and closing costs, right? In this case, I'm saying I'm putting down 25%, and I'm including a 4% closing costs, right? I'm paying for about 4% in New York State for closing costs. So that's included in here, right? So I'm taking the purchase price and multiplying it by 29%, right? Because that's how much I'm putting down, 25% plus the 4% closing cost, right? My mortgage, again, we can use a quick mortgage calculator, right? We're at about 7.5% for an investment property right now. So I can do it very quick. You can do this math, right? 339, 123, we're putting down 25%, 30-year fixed at 7.5%. See what they say here. Mortgage payment here, 1777, right? I think I did 1778. This is too low. 17, oops. What is this? 1778 times 12. Okay, so 21,000. Again, I'm just 21,000, 336 for the mortgage. My taxes, 4,500, right? Sewer, water, 600 a quarter. It's 2,400. Insurance, flood insurance, we don't need it, right? Again, here we say yearly rental unit 1, right? 1,400 unit 2. We also need to add in unit 3. So I'm just going to double this. 30, 33. I'm just going to double this. I don't have to redo the calculator. 6. Right. So that's my unit 1, 2, and 3, right? My yearly profit, 21,087, right? So my return is 6%, right? So in Port Jervis, that's not a bad return. But my cash yield, which again, this is what I look for when I'm looking at investment properties, is 20%, right? I'm putting down how much, right? $101,210. And I'm basically getting a 20% return on that in 1 year, right? So it's basically taking me 5 years to make back the investment that I put in. And for a lot of people, that's a more important number than what the actual yield is, right? And for me, because these are long-term investments, that's what I look at, right? So again, these are, and again, the NOI is 6, which is higher than it would be. And because I'm leveraging myself and I'm getting a mortgage, you can actually get much higher numbers, right? So if we compare that, right, I'm putting down $100,000 versus my mom, or, in Port Jervis, you can put down $100,000 and get a 6% NOI or 20% cash yield. In Manhattan, you're putting down $1.2 million and you're getting a, what would we say, 4.5% return and a 4.5% cash yield. So again, different numbers, different markets, right? One is more stable. One is more, again, one's a house versus a condo, right? People want different things. And that's the whole thing with investments, right? People are going to always want different things, which is nice because there are people who, again, who want to buy, I just want an easy thing, one apartment in Manhattan, or other people are like, no, I'm very open to to buying things that are a little more complicated, right? And so you can basically find something for everybody if they're flexible in where they're looking, right? And again, I'm talking about New York State. Again, New Jersey's probably a little bit different. Pennsylvania's different, right? Upstate's different. If you're, again, you can Airbnb places outside of the city, right? Maybe there's a better return on an Airbnb versus renting it out full term, right? So again, you just kind of have to get a sense of what they're looking for. Now, switching gears a little bit, but kind of on a related note, I just want to talk about 1031 exchanges, right? And again, it's called 1031. 1031 is a portion of the tax code, which basically allows the deferral of capital gains on investment properties when you invest into a like investment, right? So what does that mean, right? You own something that's an investment property, you sell it, you use that money to buy another investment property, you don't have to pay capital gains on that transaction, right? That's basically what it is, right? So what works? Condos, co-ops, multifamilies, commercial, mixed use, land, whatever it is, all qualifies. It just cannot be done on a primary residence. Now, the tricky thing comes in, and there are ways around this. Basically, if it is your primary residence and you rent it out for a period of time, you can usually do a 1031 exchange on it, right? As long as you are buying another investment property and renting that out, right? And again, I did this with someone. They bought 1970, bought a Soho artist loft for $3,000, sold it for $3 million. They had rented it out for 3 years. We did a 1031 exchange. They bought a building in Brooklyn. They paid no capital gains, right? It just couldn't be the primary residence when they did the 1031 exchange, right? Otherwise, she would have had to pay capital gains on almost $3 million, which is a lot, right? Again, 1031 exchanges have a timeline, right? So basically, you close on property A, right? That's, again, let's say this is the loft, right? You basically have 45 days to identify properties that you're saying, I might want to buy this, right? So basically, from closing to identifying properties, you have 45 days. From closing to closing on your new property, you have 180 days, right? They give you about half a year. When you close on property A, right, the first property, the funds are held by a 1031 agent, right? You don't get the money, someone holds it for you in order to make sure it's being used correctly. And that all of the proceeds need to be invested, right? And again, there's some workarounds there, but generally it's all the proceeds need to be invested. And again, if you have a mortgage on property A, you need to get a similar mortgage on property B, right? And again, 1031 exchanges are great ways to defer taxes because, again, right, you bought property A for $50,000 in 2010 and rented it out for 12 years. It's worth $1 million in today's market. You'd have to pay capital gains on that $500,000 if you just sold it. Instead, if you buy something for $1 million, you don't have to pay any capital gains at all, right? So you're basically, the whole purpose of this was to give people more money to invest, right? So every time you sold something, you didn't take a 15 to 20% hit, right? Because this is allowing money to recirculate, because that recirculation creates jobs for us, it creates jobs for attorneys, it creates, you know, more opportunities out there, right? Someone new is buying your property, that property that you're buying, right? It's creating movement in the market, right? So the government's like, that movement will create more benefits than that 10 to 15%. So let's let this money keep flowing, right? Okay, so just to get into, again, what happens a lot of the time, right? You know, people will come to you and say, I want a good investment. Let me know some short sales or foreclosures that are out there, right? And again, there's a difference between the two, right? A foreclosure is also called an REO, right? Real estate owned, right? That means that the bank who held the mortgage on the property has foreclosed on the person, taken the property back. The bank now owns the property and they're going to sell it, right? So it's a regular sale, right? The bank is the seller in this case, right? The bank is like, I want to get rid of this property. I'm not a landlord. I just want to get rid of this. They're selling it. A short sale is when the property has not been foreclosed on yet, right? It means that the seller is usually underwater, right? They bought it for $1 million. It's now worth 800,000. They have a loan for 900,000, but the bank has agreed, right, that they can sell it for less than what they owe, right? That's why it's called a short sale, because it's short of what is actually owed on the property, right? Usually it takes a bit longer for short sales to close because people have to approve it, right? The seller has to approve it. Any lien holders, again, most cases it's a bank or whoever it is, they have to release the liens. There's like paperwork that has to be done, right? With short sales, because of the time it takes and the complexity of it, most of the time they will only consider cash offers. Most of the time. That's my experience, right? Again, if you guys have different experience, great, but most of the time they want cash offers. Therefore, Joe Smith, who's like, I want to buy a short sale and put down 5%, is Smith out of luck, right? He's not going to be able to do it. And that's why it can be difficult when you have someone who says, hey, I can put down 5, 10, 20% even, but I only want to buy short sales, right? Because they're going to get cash offers because these are potentially good investments for people with cash, right? That's not to say that's not always the case, right? You can always find out about it. But when you have someone coming to you who's looking for distressed properties, REOs, short sales, auctions, whatever it is, usually there's a lot of people who want to buy them and they have cash, right? So you're going to be in a disadvantage to potentially, right? Auctions, right? And again, I've gone to a couple of these before and it's always not the best place. So I think auctions do, I made my little anagram here, artificially increase the cost, right? Because there's a bunch of bidders who think, right? They put up these auction prices for like, you can buy a townhouse in Brooklyn for $50,000, right? Well, that's the minimum bid. It's not going to go for that, right? They probably already have someone who's willing to bid 2 million on it, but your guy's like, well, I want to bid 50,000. Let's go to this auction. Uncertain terms, right? It's a buyer beware situation where it's like, we're selling this property and any encumbrances that are on it, not clear title, not anything like that, right? The commission is usually paid by the bidder, right? Your person is paying the commission to you as an agent, and sometimes there's no commission. Taxes can be in arrears, right? You're paying those back taxes, the water bill, whatever it is, the sewer bills. Income cannot be guaranteed, right? They're going to say drive by only. We don't know who's living here, and you have to deal with it when you close, right? So again, income might not be guaranteed. Ownership can be in doubt. There can be title issues, right? And that's why you need to buy title insurance. And again, nice in theory, hard in practice, right? Like I have personally never gone. I've gone to like 2 auctions at this point. We never won them because my guy was like, "Oh, great, they're asking 50,000." I was like, "This is going to go for like 5 million," and it went for like 6 million, and it was only worth 5 million. Okay, so one more thing that comes in, you tend to see. Again, you see these terms all the time, right? Rent stabilized and rent controlled. And I just want to kind of go over, and again, this tends to come in when you're looking at multifamily buildings, right? 6 units and more. There's usually going to be some sort of either rent control, rent stabilization in the building or within the units and stuff like that, right? Okay, so rent control. Rent control is on a person. A person is rent controlled, right? Anthony Genovese can be a rent controlled tenant in my building, right? The apartment itself is not rent controlled, right? A person is rent controlled. And again, rent control guaranteed very small prices year to year. You cannot get rent control anymore, right? There's no way to secure it by moving into a place, right? If Anthony dies, sorry, Anthony, I killed you. The person who moves into that apartment is not rent controlled, right? They might be rent stabilized, and we'll get to that in a second, but they are not rent controlled, right? And again, the building has to have been constructed before 1947. They had to be in their apartment since July 1st, 1971. Again, it can either become rent stabilized once that person leaves, be it feet first or not, right? Or it could be removed from stabilization. It just depends, or it could be rent stabilized. Again, that's a way complicated topic that I'm not going to talk about today, but just so you know, right? A person is rent controlled, right? You'll see oftentimes, and again, I get these from people who are looking for an investment property all the time. You'll see something on the market that's like extremely undervalued, right? It's like, a 3-bedroom on the Upper West Side for $500,000, right? And again, in caps at the beginning, it's going to say rent controlled tenant in place, right? That apartment is worth 1.5 million, but this rent controlled person is paying $800 a month, and the taxes and common charges are way higher than that, right? So the investor's taking a loss every month, right? For some people, that's actually a really good thing. It's a good thing because you're basically buying a loss, which you can write off against other gains, whatever it is. But that person does not ever have to leave the apartment, right? If you buy it, you inherit that, right? That rent control person is inherited. The same thing will happen with rent stabilized people, right? People are all the time I get, oh my God, I want to buy this. It's only, $400,000. And I said, yes, it's $400,000 because there's a rent stabilized person there. They never have to leave. Just because you buy it, they never have to, right? And so you need to know that, right? Always read the descriptions and know that you can tell people that, hey, this could be a great thing to write off some, gains that you have elsewhere, but you're not going to be able to inhabit this apartment until they want to leave. Okay, so that's rent control. Rent stabilization is on the apartment. An apartment is rent stabilized, right? And there's a tenant in there who's in a rent stabilized apartment. Anthony is not rent stabilized. Anthony lives in a rent stabilized apartment, right? So again, 6 or more units constructed between 1947 and 1974. Again, if they've been extensively renovated since 74 and got tax benefits, they can get rent stabilization. So for instance, the building I live in, which many of you have visited before, right? 2 of the apartments in the building are rent stabilized because the owner did this tax credit for a loft conversion of a commercial building back in the 80s, right? So those people are stabilized, right? Once they and their those people's apartments are stabilized. I apologize. Okay, so again, like rent control, your rent can only go up by a certain amount, usually 1 to 3%, set by the rent control guide. Right? Every year it's going to go up by some amount, right? And again, the apartment is rent stabilized, right? So again, in this case, Anthony dies. Sorry, Anthony, killed you again. The owner does some work on the apartment. They increase the rent by some amount. Again, that's all set by these crazy numbers, and we'll let Anthony do a talk on that some point in the future because I'm not as knowledgeable.
I handle this stuff, but I didn't know 1947 was like
The start date, yeah.
Start date of the construction.
And so basically, well, and again, buildings could have been built before that were more than that units. This is just for certain things, but so again, the building could have been built before, but if it turned into a rental building,
before 1974.
Yeah.
And before 2019, there was other ways to get it out of
rent stabilization, yeah,
by doing improvements. They called it Frankenstein.
We're not going to talk about that. I don't want to confuse people, but yes. So again, Anthony dies. The apartment could still be rent stabilized, right? So the new person who's moving into that apartment would be moving into a rent stabilized apartment still, right? Again, they can usually increase it by some amount, given vacancy, given certain, again, there's a lot of stuff that goes into there, but the apartment could be rent stabilized still.
But you can improve a rent stabilized apartment and then file for additional increases on top of the regular increases that you get annually.
Yep. But the biggest thing to know for an investor, right, what we're talking about today, is that if you buy a unit with a rent controlled tenant or a unit that is rent stabilized, you're inheriting that with the building.
You should know the rent roll. That's very important to know the rent roll,
what people are paying and stuff like that. Yep. So that's very important,
because even if the previous owner was supposed to file for increases each year and they didn't, they can't go back and get them after the sale, or once you miss the increase filing, you can't do it in the future.
Yeah.
So it could be some cases the rent's very low because people didn't know this.
Yep. And so I think one of the important things to know is that, again, if someone's buying a 6-family anywhere in Brooklyn, basically, you're going to have a rent controlled tenant or rent stabilized apartment, right? But that could be okay, right? Because that's probably helping the price be lower than it would if everyone was free market, right? And again, there are ways of getting, if a building is fully vacant, there are ways of getting them out of the entire building out of stabilization, stuff like that. But we're not going to talk about that today. So what is your job as an agent, right? Always get all of the information, right? Get clarification from the listing agent if you need to, right? What is the seller looking for, right? Again, if you see an auction, who is paying my fee, right? And we have to ask that now today too, right? What are the encumbrances, right? If it's a multifamily and stuff like that. When you're reaching out to brokers who have a multifamily, right? The first thing you want to ask for is, can you please send over the rent, right? And that's a list of what people are paying, if the rent stabilized controls, if what people are paying, the status of the apartment or the tenant, and again, what their rent is now, what it's gone up, lots of stuff like that, what the expenses are in the building, right? And you can get a sense of if it's a good investment based on the rent rolls, right? So, again, there's a lot that goes into it, but your job is to find out the details, right? And be knowledgeable. Okay, so here's the fun part, right? Let's go find some good investments, right? And how are we going to do that? We're going to look at cap rates, right? We don't have to go into the details of the cash return and stuff like that. So let me just show you, and I'll just use the first one here. But again, think about this, right? The multifamily investment under 5 million, great. Find that. Let me know what you think it is. But the best 1-bedroom condo unit under $1 million, right? Let's find that right now in Williamsburg, right? Let's do it quickly. I'm just gonna pick a neighborhood, right? So here we go. So I'm in OLR. I'm gonna search. We're just looking at condos at this point. Search listings, Brooklyn sales. Let's pick Williamsburg. Where are we here? Williamsburg. I'm gonna do from 1 to 1 million. I want at least a 1-bedroom. I know that just because I think that's better. I don't want lofts or professionals. Well, I'm okay with lofts actually in this case. And let's do the search. Oop, and we want condos. And that's it. That's all we need, right? So we have, oops, let me hide this. We have 19 properties here, right? So what are we going to do, right? Okay, these are all under $1 million, right? These are all 1-bedrooms or lofts, right? This is a 2-bedroom, walk up, East Williamsburg, South 6, right? Okay, so I'm just going to look through. And with each of these, we have all these numbers, right? So we can figure out most of this in terms of a return, right? Because we know the purchase price, we know the common charges and taxes. What don't we have that we need to figure out? The rent, exactly. So how do we do that? Well, we can either be a neighborhood expert in the neighborhood. Christine, are you on the call? Let's see if Christine's on here. Oh, is my meeting over? What happened? Oh God. Did I lose everyone? That's not good. So let me go back on Zoom. Oh, I'm here. Sorry, you guys are here. You're still here. Good. Sorry, Whitney. It disappeared. Christine, are you here? Christine, not here. Okay, so basically, if we go through these, we can do one of two things. So number one, right? Okay, so let's just click on 131 North first, right? We can go here on OLR, and we can click on the building, right? This is 588 square feet. It's about $1,600 a month between these two. We can look at the active rentals or the rented, and we can get a sense of what they rented for, right? So that one's bigger. That one's bigger. That's a studio. Oh, this is the same size, but this is a penthouse, 5,500, right? So again, let's imagine that has private outdoor space, so that probably bumps the price up. 4,600 for a 1-bedroom, right? So let's imagine we're getting 4,800 for this one, right? So 4,800, right? Minus, what do we say? 1,900 for the common charges and taxes, 2,900 times 12. And the purchase price was what? Oops. The purchase price was 999 divided by 999 000. 3.4%, right? So that's the return on that unit. And you can do the same thing for all of these. And again, when we know we know the math that goes into, let me just go back to the results. Sorry. We know the math that goes into all of this, right? And so what can we control, right? We can control how high the rent is, right? So things that will rent for more are going to get you a better yield, right? Things that are priced less are going to get you a better yield. And things with lower common charges and taxes are going to get you a better yield. And when we look at a property type, right? What do you think has the most impact, or which one do you think, which is the most important in these calculations?
the best yield.
Yes. What do you think? Looking for what will give you the best yield? I mean, Dewey's looking at me like I'm asking you a weird question. Okay, here's the thing, right? And think of it this way: a 1 bedroom in Williamsburg is probably going to cost about $1 million, right? If it's a walk up, maybe a little bit less. If it's a doorman elevator building, maybe a little bit more, right? So the price for the unit is basically going to be fixed, right? It's going to be $1 million, plus or minus, right? Maybe the range is 10%. The rent will be different based on the amenities and things like that. But we see that there's a huge correlation. The more amenities you have, the more the common charges and taxes are, right? So that's going to go up. So if we find something with low common charges and taxes, it's probably going to have the biggest impact on the return that we're getting. That's what I've always found. So I can see just from knowing the building, right? 429 Kent, the real estate taxes are $55 a month right now because there's an abatement. It's one of the few buildings with an abatement still, right? So we're basically making an extra, I would say $700 a month, and that's going to have way more of an impact. And because this is a full service building, the rent's going to be high too. So that's basically the equivalent of getting $5,500 a month in rent because we're saving $700 in the taxes because of this abatement, right? I could almost guarantee you that this is going to have the best return of anything that we're seeing on here, right? Even though this is $600, this is East Williamsburg. Rents are going to be lower, right? Same thing here, right? This has $1,274 in taxes. The return's not going to be good. I can guarantee you that, right? So whenever I was doing this, I would look for either A, buildings with tax abatements, or B, pre-war condos, because the taxes and common charges are way lower than post-war ones, generally speaking, right? So again, Jackson, that location, again, walk-up location is okay. Again, things with outdoor space, things with washer dryers, right? There's going to be a lot of things, right? Oh, here you go. This Humboldt one might be good, but that's East Williamsburg also, right? Again, we can see what this, this is $3 taxes. The common charges are low as well. I think this is a walk-up building though, isn't it? Yeah, it's a walk-up building. So it's fourth floor walk-up, right? So that's going to decrease the price a bit. But again, that could be good as well. 446 Kent, right? The Schaefer Landing. I know these don't rent for that much as the Osteen building. Again, this one has outdoor space, but it's a walk-up, right? And if you do the math, you're going to see that each of these has a different return, right? Again, this is this is actually pretty big. And this is a cheap. This might actually be not bad. Do you own this building, Anthony?
It might be the umbrella back.
No, this is different. Again, big rooms too. Ceiling height 15. I mean, this could actually be pretty good. What these rent for? 1196 Metropolitan. Sponsor unit. The Williamsburg Firehouse Loft. Let's see what these rent for. 2. Is that far?
It's not far. It's it's near the BQE entrance.
Okay. So
it's far from the subway.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these didn't rent for that much. Okay, so the rental price might be good, but you kind of see what we're doing. So again, use this and start thinking as an investor, right? Again, if you had $1 million, what would you spend it on? Right? What would you buy? With $1 million cash, you got to buy one condo. What would you buy? And again, you might say, oh, I want to buy in, you might want to buy in East Williamsburg because you think it's going to appreciate, right? You might want, I might want to buy in Soho because I like being close and I can walk if there's ever a problem, right? Everyone is going to have a different priorities in what they're doing, right? I would say I'm not going to buy anything in Manhattan. I'm going to buy 3 houses upstate and make way more money on, right? But everyone has different things that they want, right? That they want to do and things like that. And again, this is kind of just a general introduction to how to think as an investor and how to kind of look at these different properties. We can keep, going over this. I'm happy to answer any questions that we have. I'll stop the recording in a second. But just know everyone has different things, right? One investor might say, oh, I'm totally open to investing in Queens. And the other one says, I only want to be in FiDi, right? They like FiDi, right? Again, I know people who bought investment properties in FiDi, right? Did I agree with that? No, I wouldn't do it. But they like FiDi and they bought there. Totally fine, right? Everyone's got a different opinion, and that's okay. So, okay, I'm going to stop the recording.